Welcome to episode 401 of the Barcelona podcast, brought to you by the Blue Wire Podcast Network. I'm Dan Hilton, and he is Domagoj Kostanjšak. And unfortunately, Domagoj, as we were trying to get this one off the ground, not only did Barcelona have that draw 3-3 to Inter Milan, we're going to talk about what it means to Barcelona, but you've had a pretty rough 24 hours yourself, haven't you?
Yeah, I mean, Barca played so poorly, gave me COVID again. So no, I'm just kidding. Yeah, I do actually. I am a bit under the weather, but I'll do my best to kind of push through it.
Yeah, so Domagoj does have a bit more of an excuse than me. I think I'm just a bit frustrated and dejected, and my headline started yesterday with 5 headlines I always put on YouTube with again and again and again and again. Yeah, and there is something correlating about when Princess and I started this show a few years ago, and Roma was that first shock to the system, and then Liverpool, and then Bayern Munich, and then Bayern Munich again, and Benfica, and now Inter Milan. Well, Eintracht Frankfurt in the middle, and then Inter Milan, and it just continues on and on and on and on. So, as far as where Barcelona is at this moment, I think we should, I guess, talk about the game and the issues. And I think what the likely thing that people are doing is assigning blame, and we have to kind of figure out where blame is assigned. And for me, I think I came out with full voice. I think there are a lot of times when I have defended or I tried to defend Busquets and Piqué and Alba when they deserved it. And I've defended Xavi when he's deserved it. But I think where you and I are probably going to land in the same place, that Xavi out is insane. That's an insane thing to say. This project is in its infancy, and not even infancy, but let's say it's a toddler, right? Like it's a big summer. It went to preschool. That's what Lewandowski and all that stuff felt. But this is still a young project that is not yet ready for Champions League. It's not yet ready for prime time. But the unfortunate part of that is that Barcelona spent a lot of money over the summer to not make the Champions League. But as people are talking, the number seems to be about 20 million euros that they're going to miss out by not making the group stage. And depending on how far they go in Europa League, that could be up to, I think, 12 or 13. So you're truly talking about a loss of between 15 and 17 euros, which 17 million euros rather, which I want to remind people the salaries of PK and Alba and Busi and Frankie de Jong are close to 120. So once again, the problem is going to be shedding salary more so than it is about this revenue that's going to be had, because people still keep coming to the stadium. You're going to make up 25 to 30 million euros in revenue. You just have to hope that the fans don't leave.
Yeah, that's the big thing, because winning generates excitement, and excitement kind of generates revenue and money and all that stuff. And no one guarantees us that we'll actually do well in the Europa League either. I mean, we've seen last season, we were also hyped. We thought we would win it, we would do well, and then what happens? We just get demolished in a way that no one really could have or wanted to even imagine. On Xavi, I've come to realize that we have to be kind of extremely harsh on him and hold him accountable. Yes, not everyone might like what I'll say, but he is a good manager who has a clear idea of football, and this is a very good thing as a foundational element of him as a manager. He has very good understanding of the type of player the team needs, but it still remains to be seen whether he has this theoretical and coaching capacity to kind of to mold the players that he already has. So it's quite odd to me that a midfield with Busquets and Pedri doesn't have enough Pausar control. We shouldn't need Bernardo Silva for that. So Xavi has, at least initially, shown us he can deploy sensible structures with clear intentions, even though that doesn't always translate well on the pitch, and that he knows how to recruit players that kind of fit that blueprint. I think in that sense, his greatness may be just in the overhaul of the squad profiles, and then Barcelona eventually getting someone who knows how to get the best of that squad to help it reach its full potential. Because one of the big worries as of right now for me, for Xavi, is the underlying issues of last season, which are yet to be properly assessed. Being overly vertical, for example, and having this below standard defensive blocks. A team that gives you as much of the ball as they often do, Barcelona, which is minimal, and yet you can subsequently still play through them with relative ease. This is a big issue. This is something that can make or break the whole project, because every top team nowadays is kind of incredibly tough to play through, and not just because they press well, but because their blocks in whichever phase of the game are incredibly difficult and compact, and they're not easy to play through. So can Xavi actually coach De Jong, Pedri, or Gavi, or whoever to be better at this, to be more defensively aware? I mean, many of the defensive traits that you can, the definite traits that you can observe in a team always show right from the beginning. It's not usually the new problems that break a team; it's the old ones, that the well known ones that we usually don't address. So consider almost any team with a lasting manager in the world, how early their present issues were well known. This is the biggest worry I have with Xavi. Is he going to address the present issues, and how long should this even take? A couple of months with a brand new team, maybe a season, 2 seasons, I don't know. And how long is he going to have to fix those issues? For now, to me, it seems that Xavi would rather buy players that already have these traits, let's call them traits that he needs, drill into them, then kind of drill them himself. There's nothing wrong with that, and people have done it before him. Coaches have done it before him. It's also why he wants Bernardo so much, for example. Yes, for the offensive potential, we know what Bernardo is like, but defensively he's not big or particularly strong. But he goes through all the right motions, and he knows his basics extremely well. We kind of suffer from having no natural defenders in the middle, apart from Busquets, for example. Well, people who do the basics to a high and reliable level. It's one of the reasons we are so vulnerable. If this issue persists, which it has so far, it could communicate a failure of coaching. The coaching failure can then ultimately reflect at the highest level, which so far it has, because defending is largely a structural and coaching thing. Of course, having a natural player like Araujo, for example, it helps, but it's also largely learned behavior, isn't it? No reason why De Jong shouldn't be able to improve in that regard. But why hasn't he so far? And this is a process, yes, but at the same time, how long should this process take? If it isn't fixed already this season, for example, again, it might point out to Xavi either not training it enough or being unable to do it. So the thing is, it's difficult to tell which one, if either of those things is actually true, because we don't have the access to the behind the scenes stuff, and we don't really know what's happening. And Xavi needs time, yes, I would say so, but not as much as we as fans would love to believe, because he's a Barca, the clock is ticking. So it's one of those consequences of being successful, or rather being at a club that's kind of historically been so successful. Sorry.
In response to Xavi, I think one, people have to understand, especially those saying Xavi out, that look at Graham Hunter at Chelsea, look at almost any manager at high level clubs that have been replaced mid-season. They almost always play the same players that were playing before. Very rarely do you see a new manager come in and then new players are played. That's one. Part two of that as well is that PK was always going to start that match. Like when I gave my starting 11, it was the only one that I saw an option for. It was the one that I think had to happen. And Frankie de Jong was not in that starting 11, but Alejandro Balde was starting for Marcos Alonso. I thought that was severely limiting. I think Marcos Alonso, I defended him last week or prior early in the week because I think Xavi shouldn't be selecting him in spots like he did, getting around five at the back with a player that an outside back rather that cannot dribble around a back line. You could see just how penetrative Balde was. Like, I'm not saying that Balde is so much better of a player as than Marcos Alonso, but Balde much better fits with the players around him at this moment. And I understand the inexperience of defending, but there is nothing that Marcos Alonso does, even though he's taller, that he does defensively that Balde has not been able to do so far this season. At least, even if Alonso is just as good a player or better at this point in his career, Balde is more in form at the moment. And that's why I certainly would have started him over Alonso. I thought that was Xavi's one misstep, if you will. You probably could have put Frankie de Jong in that game earlier. I think that was part of the calculation as well. Same thing with Ansu at some point. But I think as far as what Xavi has to deal with, like the built-in excuses, Araujo, Koundé, those kind of things, like you have the personnel, you have the personnel that you have. But to your point, I think the space that I spoke about earlier in the week that I was scared of between an aging Busquets, even though Busquets has not gotten slower, it's just the Gerard Piqué behind him has lost a full step at this point. So Piqué is changing his positioning. Like I did look back like 10 years ago. PK and that high line of confrontation, he was the mobile one. Like to say that Puyol was mobile isn't necessarily true. Like Puyol looked a lot like Eric Garcia in his positioning and all those things, except he manages to get the block and Eric Garcia doesn't get the block, but they're very much the same size. I think Puyol's even like an inch or two shorter than Eric Garcia, who stands at, for our English listeners, 6 feet tall. But for PK, because he's lost a step, he's now taking a step back. And that means that there is space in between he and Busquets that these La Liga teams are unable to exploit, because the Liga teams they have to focus more on defending. But the minute you step up the competition level, the minute the wingers get faster, the minute the attacking midfielders get faster, and the minute the defensive midfielders and fullbacks on the opposition team have the ability to actually accurately play diagonal long balls, now you have a problem, because those diagonal balls are slicing and dicing Barcelona to great effect when the competition level gets higher. And, I think as far as what we want to talk about with the Inter Milan, like, there are good things. There's Ter Stegen, there's Pedri. I mean, I thought Gabi's effort, like, look at the blocks that Gabi had yesterday against Inter Milan, like, just phenomenal. So I think we land in the same spot as well, where there is something that has to fundamentally change. And I think you really perfectly laid out that Xavi, as a manager himself, does need to improve, and he needs to make these players better than they are. I think there are players that have improved under him. Again, I do look at Eric Garcia. As much as he made that mistake yesterday, other than that one moment when Lautaro Martinez, a very, very, very good striker, undressed him, Eric Garcia has been much better this season than he was even a year ago. He has improved greatly under Xavi. I could argue that Pedri has improved under Gabi. You could argue that a number of players have improved. Dembele, like, this is the best version of Dembele we've ever seen. I know people were frustrated with some of what he did yesterday, but he was also really good at other times. And then Rafinha, it seems stupid, but you felt like Xavi, not only were they unlucky on the road with those calls not going their way, but you felt like Barcelona also gave away points against Inter in Italy because he started Rafinha on the left and Dembele on the right. Like, that was wrong. That was just unequivocally wrong. And one of the things that I will look to this season is saying, yeah, Xavi, they got unlucky on the road. The handball didn't go their way. They should have got a draw from that game. But, like, you made the wrong choice by starting Rafinha on the left. Like, that, you had to fix that. You had to not do that, and that's what happened. So yeah, I mean, as far as moving forward for Xavi, I think you really laid it out well. But I think I want to move on almost to El Clásico more quickly than anything else, because I think for what Barcelona has to do in the Champions League, I mean, they have to beat Bayern Munich and Victoria Pilsen, but because Inter Milan play earlier next week, 2 weeks from now, there is nothing Barca can do. They're going to watch. I mean, they're not going to do this, but they could watch on pregame their Champions League hopes slip away, because Victoria Pilsen needs to get a result against Inter Milan in Italy. I can't see that happening with Victoria Pilsen, what they've done so far in the Champions League. So it's tough. It's a group of death. There's a lot of excuses for Barcelona, but they didn't help themselves, and now they're heading down to the Europa League.
Yeah, that's very true. This is always, when you get into a position like this, it's just when you have to depend on others and have to depend on beating someone that you don't really believe you can beat. The thing is with Barcelona, I think they're fully capable of beating Bayern. We've showed it in our first game, but they're also capable of just collapsing completely in that game. So it really depends which Barca we see. And against Inter Milan, I want to say that I've seen all sorts of takes saying that we made 0 to no changes compared to the first game, and I don't think that's necessarily true. Xavi did tinker a little bit. He did make tweaks that help us be more effective. Yes, Inter were also kind of more deadly on the counter, but I think we've done decently well, all things considered. I mean, yes, look at the game. It's 3-3. It's not a good result for us. That's all true, and there's a lot of factors going into it. But I feel like there's a lot of negative emotions pouring out. People are reacting to what's happened, and understandably, we're all very angry, and we were disappointed. But there are some things that Xavi couldn't control. That also needs to be said. But I feel like the changes that he made for the Inter game, specifically the diamond midfield, served the purpose of unsettling the Inter's 5-3-2 block, and it did so quite well for some parts of the game. Last week, the setup was also decent, but the personnel, as you said, with Rafinha, for example, seemed off, and the pure execution was also very lacking. Xavi reacted by adding Sergio Roberto in that fourth midfielder role, and this time he would attack the half space through the half space as a half space penetrator type of role, and this would in turn help enable the wide isolations that Barcelona so crave. And so I feel like in terms of
when you could tell that Sergio Roberto even pushed up farther around the 25th minute or so. You saw when I think Gabi committed a tackle, and then Xavi got an opportunity to talk to Alonso and Roberto, and he changed the positioning a bit. Alonso tucked in a bit more, and Roberto pushed a bit farther forward. And once that happened, 15 minutes after that, the first goal happened. And you can see that Inter Milan is pretty unbalanced after that. And I think that's the other thing about Xavi getting outmanaged by Inzaghi, because once that change happened, Barcelona were very much on the front foot, and they should have had a second goal before Inter got two. And instead of getting that second goal, they come out in halftime, Inter Milan makes a change, and Inter Milan gets a goal. I mean, and the goal happens, the goal should have happened. Like, when we talk about that first goal, that's when it all goes wrong. PK, just awful PK. One of the worst defensive mistakes we've seen in his entire career. I mean, that's how bad that was. And yet, maybe the worst of his career looking back. And so for Xavi's plan, PK's error kind of has it go sideways, but he also didn't adapt to it after the fact, right? Like Barcelona, and that's kind of where I'm kind of confused at what to make of this kind of match here and how that will affect Barcelona in the Liga, because there is something physical, there's something about the personnel that you're saying, and there is something about tactics that need to improve. That's true, but I think to me, I get the sense that will all improve along the margins this season. Like Xavi can improve this team, and I've said it too, that this team, when Koundé and Araujo get back, and after the World Cup, and some players have been rested, and you see players kind of find different form throughout the year, there's a world in the spring where Barcelona is the best team in the Europa League. They are the best team in the Liga. Like it's possible that happens with few things going their way. But there is something about Europe. There's something about like the intangibles that we just can't speak about mentality, about that's why I said that the problems persist when Xavi is the coach, just like they did when Koeman and Quique Setién and basically anybody but Luis Enrique. But even before Luis Enrique, it seemed like the ball was starting to roll in this direction. And now we're at half a decade or more than half a decade. And Barcelona seems to have the same problem between the ears, more so than it is about the tactics. And again, even the personnel has changed. The president has changed. It's all changed. But Barcelona is the same. And it's not just because Piqué and Alba and Busquets haven't changed, because Alba didn't even play in the match, right? Like Alba was just sitting on the sideline. And it's not even about Roberto. Roberto was just fine in that match, right? He fundamentally made sense in the role that he played in. And even looking at a new guy like Lewandowski, I don't want to put the savior card on him. He scores 2 goals in the game. He got free when he needed to. Barcelona scored 3 goals. Like, they should have won that game 3-1, but they didn't. It was 3-3. They drew the game. And so Lewandowski was good enough, but him and Dembélé and Rafinha, like, there are times when the crossing just isn't good enough. Like in Italy, it was 50 crosses. It wasn't as many yesterday, but it wasn't good enough. Like, they weren't finding each other's heads, and there were so many attacking moves that broke down that it seems like other teams are able to exploit. But the minute they get into Europe, now those crosses are 10 to 15 yards away, or they're overshot every time. And it's confusing to me, because it feels like, yes, things need to be tweaked on the field, and personnel and another summer of free transfer is going to be helpful in 2 or 3 positions. But fundamentally in Europe, like, I don't know how you exercise those demons. Like, I don't know. I mean, other than the answer might be truly in the locker room, no longer having Gerard Piqué sitting there at halftime, no longer having Sergio Busquets sit there at halftime. I don't know what that is, right? Like, and I don't know. It's not about blaming them. It's saying that they're that end of an era, that chapter, that thing that Piqué says, "Oh, I'll step aside." He said that 2 years ago, right? And he's still the 5th choice center back. So I don't know, other than having those veterans finally walk out that door, and the club find a way to walk them out that door, not by their own choice. Until the club finally do that, I don't know how Europe changes, because I don't know who else to blame.
It does come. I mean, we have to remember that this Champions League run, yes, it's been filled with questionable performances, and we have not looked at our best throughout the first games. But it's also true that things that have happened, like events and unique situations that are almost impossible to predict, whether that's injuries or referee decisions or individual mistakes from the veterans that they shouldn't be making those mistakes. Yes, but I feel like it's very difficult to judge our whole campaign based on everything that's happened. And for Inter specifically, I feel a lot of it indeed does come down to injuries. But the other issue is you have to adapt to the players you can have, and this needs to reflect in the lineup selection, which also was a problem. There's no getting away from that. It was a problem for Xavi. Without Araujo and Koundé behind Busquets, there is zero athleticism in that back line for a team that presses high and needs to face the likes of Lautaro and Dzeko on the break. This is far from good. And that problem is then also multiplied by times 100 if you're not compact or properly staggered in other zones of the pitch, which is what you also touched upon, the spaces that we have to cover. Reducing the spaces between your players might seem counterintuitive when you're facing a narrow and compact block, but the interaction between Xavi's 3-1-6, I would think it was most of the time, and Inzaghi's 5-3-2 was kind of heavily skewed in Inter's favor, I feel, on paper alone at least. If you're going to play a 3-1-6 in possession, you must prioritize where you're looking to attack and what you're doing specifically, more so than just filling the zones on the football pitch. To me, it seemed like Xavi looked at Inter's 5-3-2 and then decided to create a 6-lane attacking structure that's too static and lacks fluidity to break down a 5 at the back block. When a team plays a 3-1-6, they often fall prey to having just 3-1 build-up shape be compact. So in the first phase, you have to have a narrowness and have to have a narrowness that allows for combination play and better safety nets for players when they lose the ball. Dembele, when he's doubled down the flank, which happens almost every single game that we struggle in, he's too far from a player to just pass the ball back and retain possession and combine with that player because the spaces are too wide. And it's just about, for Xavi, it's just about pinning the defenders back, which is not good enough. That's why I'm saying we're too static. Xavi has this idea of wide wingers always pinning the back line and providing width. Okay, that's absolutely fine. But if you don't offer them support in a staggered structure, your isolation will only ever achieve exactly that. It will isolate your wingers from the rest of the team, and that includes both your players and and the opposition players. This system, the 3-1-6, on paper should encourage play through the lines, not make it nigh impossible to do so, which Barca have done actually. And we could actually get away with that back then when we had Leo Messi in the team. We had the same issues, but you have Messi who can actually find the passing angles. He can find the lanes that are usually inaccessible. Now, however, you just can't retain possession down the middle effectively if you don't have a proper structure. Otherwise, a 3-1-6 encourages what you said, just directly spamming long balls to the last line against a 5-3-2. Even if you have dropping options from the last line, they're almost inaccessible because of the 3 versus 1 security the position has in the middle. So you literally need to slap the ball long and hope something happens in the 6 versus 5 that you have before one of the opposition midfielders kind of just drops deeper to have the numerical parity. It's kind of suboptimal, and there are a couple of ways that I would actually combat it, but it's going to be a long rant, so I'm just going to stop right here for a bit.
Yeah, so let's transition to Real Madrid again. I'm really glad that Domagoj, that not only did I bring you on today, because I think usually my brain is looking at the tactics and caring about that, but again, I think I'm a bit tired. I'm a bit frustrated, as people know. Like when you do the podcast and you watch every game, and you're caring about all this stuff week in and week out. I think there is some Champions League and European fatigue for me. I think as I'm scrolling, I'm watching people in the belief give up before the match was over. So by the 68th minute after Inter had scored, I'm almost convincing myself that, the team doesn't have the fight. They don't have the belief that's required in this game. And yet they finish at 3-3, sure, but they go down 3-2 even. So I think there was those are the parts of it that are deflating to me. And part of what makes El Clásico so interesting is that last season when Barcelona smacked around Real Madrid 4-0, right? Ronald Araujo was huge in that game. It must be said. He is, I think, even more than Koundé actually at this moment, the biggest loss from that game. Courtois might be back in time. Koundé likely won't, but could be back in time. As of recording. He has not completely been ruled out, but again, it's very unlikely. And worrisome enough is that Madrid, from all the way you just spoke about, Madrid, when they've been playing well this season, they basically look like Inter Milan on steroids. What they do well is exactly what Barcelona is being, or does not have the personnel at the moment to deal with. And so even another little factor here, Real Madrid against the 1-1 against Shakhtar Donetsk, they qualified for the next round. They just had to go through the motions. And so they rested a ton of players. So a lot of players got rest. And this year they are much more the sum of their parts up top not without Benzema, but without Benzema being Benzema. And so far, Real Madrid have just figured out ways. Rodrigo has been really good. Unfortunately, I always thought there was something in there, and I think he's coming to fruition. Chouamani and Camavinga are looking more and more comfortable by the week. Unfortunately, Luka Modric is in good form, and as far as veterans going out, Real Madrid, fortunate for Barca or not, Barcelona have to move on from their veterans for XYZ reasons, and Real Madrid, I think with Modric, they don't have to move on with him because he's still doing everything that's being asked of him. and he's not asked to do much defensively. That's why they brought in young, athletic players where that's kind of where the game is going. They brought in guys who can shut down those spaces that you and I are talking about. That Barcelona unfortunately had to leave open because they do have just Busquets, and then you have Piqué behind him. And there's only so much you can do if you don't have Araujo or Koundé and just superior athletes shutting down those spaces. So, yeah, I mean, Madrid are also going to be at home at the Santiago Bernabeu. So all signs point to Real Madrid winning this game.
Yes.
For a lot of different reasons. I mean, I'm not like trying to sum that up or sugarcoat it. That said, again, Barcelona last year they lost 5 straight. They had lost the most since what was the 40s last year when they finally conquered Real Madrid 4-0. So as we saw against Inter Milan, there is the basics are in place for Barcelona to do well against Real Madrid. Like there is a way that they cut up and they carve up, and Barcelona, or Real Madrid rather, on their wings, especially their fullbacks are their weakness. So there is this world where Rafinha and Dembélé they eat, and there's a world where Lewandowski in the middle gets hot and figures something out. Like there's a world where Barcelona win that game 2-0 at the Santiago Bernabeu because they do have the tools to do that. But it's again defensively where all the concerns are, and we might find another shootout with Real Madrid. But I think more importantly, Domagoj, going off the mentality and the grit and stuff, all I want to see from Barcelona, because again, the Liga will not be decided by this one result, because Barcelona currently even on points without Koundé, without Araujo, and those players are going to get healthy. And as I say, this is going to come down to getting a 1-0 win against Mallorca as much as it is against getting a real in El Clásico. Yes, it matters because points against your direct rivals matter more than anything else. Yes. But a negative result to Real Madrid will not deter Barcelona's entire season. Like they can get healthy in a way that Real Madrid won't, and they can be better in the spring. But what I want to see from Barcelona, why I hope there's a positive result, even though there doesn't look to be, like, you know what I mean? As in, I'm not going to be completely disjointed if they don't get a result. But again, I want to see some fight. Like, what I don't want to see is them kind of accept the reality of what they are and allow Real Madrid to do a bit of what they want to do. Like, there clearly was hunger, there was fight, there was desire from Barcelona in that game. I want to say, like, in that first half especially, they had the necessary intensity, but that intensity wasn't enough in the second half. They dropped off. It happened. So for 90 minutes against your greatest rival, like you have to show me something. That's what I want to see from Barcelona.
Yeah, that's true. I think both teams are kind of in significantly different stages compared to last season when we demolished them. Back then, I was pretty confident that we were the better team, and that ended up being true. Well, not in the long run because they won the league, not us. But I'm not so sure I can confidently say we'll repeat the result or even just the outcome, as you've said. I think Real Madrid have the upper hand going into this game, and that's even considering that we don't mind as much as I can say it, playing at the Santiago Bernabeu. But Real Madrid also, yes, you mentioned it, they fly high with Benzema and Courtois on top form, which they aren't, and Courtois might not even be available from the latest reports I've seen. So this is a huge factor. However, we also have to address that mentality thing that you said, because they also have Real Madrid have this incredible knack of just forcing play and getting goals and getting wins, even when they honestly just play like crap. Excuse my French. So I think Barca have been doing similar things in La Liga, where they haven't really been at the best. Sorry. But still getting the victories. But can they do it against a top rival like Real Madrid? It remains to be seen. The thing is, it will be all about controlling space, because Ancelotti does not really care that much, too much about ball retention as such, and he wants to be as direct as possible at every chance possible. So they will move the ball with the front six, the forward line, and the midfield line. The fullbacks, they don't really provide width, or they don't really constantly overlap. They're not really much of an offensive threat anymore compared to the era when Zidane was at the helm of the team. They do stay deep to provide that technical security, and in the phase two, where the wingers like Vinicius, Rodrigo, Valverde, they stay high, and then they have protection behind them. And I feel like this is what Ancelotti will go for. He will try and make it. He will try and stop a wide threat, which is our greatest weapons at the moment. And it's difficult because I think Madrid are still very fluid and stable, and overall they have improved on the last season's iteration due to just some players arriving, as you said, like Tchouaméni, or just some other players like Valverde, for example, improving greatly, and Rodrigo as well, kind of shining in this new role that he's been given. of course, Vinicius is the obvious danger man, and he typically acts as this touchline winger. So I'm really interested to see how we plan to stop that, because this is a direct Real Madrid team, and we are a team that if you bypass our press, there's just too much space to exploit, and Madrid will have the personnel, that will have the means to really exploit it, and this is where they can hurt us. So now, more even the same as the game with Inter Milan, this is how we have to control the space. We have to ensure that we are more compact, and we have to ensure that we are not so easy to play through. Because if we are as leaky as we've been against Inter Milan, for example, if those mistakes keep piling up, I just don't see a world in which we score more goals than we concede against Real Madrid.
Yep. Yeah, so I think I'm going to continue to look at that preview, see if I can find some holes. I still have some tape of them to watch, but I did try to see some matches, and just like Barcelona, you watch that Mallorca match and you go, Barcelona, they're getting results, but they're not playing well. And that, again, is the Real Madrid playbook. Yeah. I watched them against Getafe. They were not good, and yet they got a result. That's how it goes. But speaking of results, Domagoj, you had a major result, and this is where we end the show on a very high note, on a positive note. Your book, and when we last spoke, it was about to be, well, we announced it, but it was about to be out and about to be available. But now we are going to have the link down in the show notes below. Anatomy of a Genius, Leo Messi's Tactical Evolution at FC Barcelona is out. It's available. You can buy it. My copy is, unfortunately, for those in the U.S., it's going to take a little longer to get to you. I can speak from that firsthand. That it does take a little bit. But Domagoj, your book is available. Not only congratulations, I'm excited to read through it, and it has gotten positive reviews so far. People are seeming to be eating it up. But yeah, I mean, we asked you before about what took to reading it, but as far as getting a book done, I mean, what was the process like? Not only how long, but I mean, as this idea was kind of coming together, and then you kind of sitting down and doing the grunt work and putting it in and getting interviews and talking to people and all that stuff. So yeah, what was that process like?
I think, and people ask me often, how long did it take? I think the most difficult and the longest period was actually doing the interviews and doing the research. Once I got all of that out of the way, once I got my quotes, once I got my material, my images and all that stuff, the write-up was actually pretty, well, I don't want to say easy, but that was the easier part, at least. Just to get the people on board, just contact some of the higher profile people in the industry and just get them to answer me first, and then accept to talk to me about this random book I'm writing, because I'm still a nobody in the industry. So it's very difficult to kind of get a hold of some of those people. But it's a bit of a sneak peek, but I did get a La Masia coach to actually speak to me about Leo Messi. He hasn't coached Messi directly. I have to emphasize that, and I did in my book as well. But he knows how La Masia works, and he knows how they develop players in the academy, and that is one of the highlights of the book as well. And there are some pretty big names in there too that I feel have really given me a lot of juicy material. I don't think this is any particularly groundbreaking stuff. It's more of a combination of being tactical as much as I can, but also making it accessible to the casual fan as well. If you're interested in Leo Messi and just his journey at Barcelona, I think it's a nice blend of being detailed, but at the same time making it approachable, making it easier to digest for the casual fans. Hopefully, it's a mix of the best of both worlds. We'll see what. I'm eager to see what the more tactical minds have to say about it, but at the same time, if I was more focused on having the style and the structure be more easily digestible. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, I mean, we do know that that there's a lot has been written about Messi, and I think sometimes there is this desire that people have when writing about him to personify him, to figure out like who he is, as opposed to you who kind of took the approach of what he does or what he did, right? And the choices that were made for him and about him on the field, which I think is, I mean, a direction and a place to go that I'm excited to see.
Thank you.
The myopic view of the tactics involved. So yeah, that link for your book, again, Anatomy of a Genius, Leo Messi's Tactical Evolution, FC Barcelona, is going to be down in the show notes. So order your copy and give it a read. So Domagoj, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Welcome.
Thanks for handling the Inter Milan and the El Clásico preview with me. And congratulations again on your book.
Thank you so much, Dan.
Okay, so also give him a follow on Twitter and Instagram down in the show notes. We are on Twitter and Instagram at the Barcelona Pod, at HelpingD13 for me. Close Facebook group, the Barcelona Podcast. Answer the questions, I'll let you in. Unfortunately, things are a bit sour there in the moment, but people have been behaving. So I actually do want to thank the Facebook group. Sometimes they pop off, but yes, there's some arguing, but obviously when there are hurt feelings, that happens everywhere. But the Facebook group has not been as much of a cesspool as Twitter, so that is the compliment that I can share. And then Patreon, there's no cesspool over there. Patreon is how we continue to do these shows. I really appreciate that. And then on YouTube as well, where I have my 5 headlines, I'll have an El Clásico preview likely coming out tomorrow or Saturday. And then we have, again, plenty of content as well throughout the World Cup period and all that stuff. So give it a subscribe and a follow over there. But most importantly, thanks so much for listening to the show. Until next time, we'll talk to you soon. And after a result like Inter Milan and with everything happening in the Champions League, most importantly, Forza Barca.